Okay, welcome to week 3 of Theories of Personality. It's our second lecture, so we're going to be covering the second half of chapter 3, which deals with Carl Jung and analytic psychology. Remember, Jung is a neo-Freudian, someone who lived around the time of Freud, and and then later on, well, he was a follower of Freud. And then later on proposed his own theory and broke away from Freud. But let's keep going. Let's get to where we left off. We talked about a lot of things. So we need to get to where we left off, which was a little bit beyond halfway. Okay, I know we talked about the collective unconscious. We talked about the shadow and the self. And now we need to talk about the development of personality according to Jung. So remember, we talked about Jung does believe in a personal unconscious and a collective unconscious, and then there's the ego, which functions like the ego does in Freud's theory. So we talked about several concepts there, but let's talk about how Jung believes personality develops over time. Okay. According to Jung, we develop toward self-realization as we age. Okay. So we're going to talk about from childhood to adulthood, what happens during that time, when the ego develops and that kind of stuff. Okay. So at first, during childhood, of course, the identity is not well developed. You're born completely helpless and dependent. You don't have an identity of yourself. Okay. The identity you have as a child is based on parental demands. Okay. They tell you what to do, what to eat, and how to behave yourself and dress you in a certain way. And you really don't have an identity of yourself when you're a child, and that's understandable. Okay. Parents can enhance or impede personality development, okay, by rewarding and punishing certain behaviors. As the child grows and wants to develop an identity of his or her own, parents can sometimes get in the way. Maybe being too demanding or demanding the child be a certain way or act a certain way, being overly harsh. So they can impede personality development, or they can actually enhance it by encouraging the child, maybe to explore, to be themselves. Of course, there always has to be rules and guidelines so children don't get hurt and don't, do things that are just, that wouldn't jive very well with society. Okay. You don't want your kid growing up to be a criminal, for instance, and there's some children that if you let them do whatever they want, they're going to do some awful things. So there needs to be guidelines, there need to be rules, but you need to provide an environment in which children can grow and become who they're meant to be. Okay. And you can get in the way of that as a parent if you're too controlling, too harsh, too punishing, and you basically impede the child's personality development. The ego begins to take a definite form when children can distinguish between themselves and others, between themselves and objects, when they begin to use the word I, according to Jung. At the beginning, children don't use such language. Well, they can't even use much language at the beginning. But eventually, they learn to recognize themselves in the mirror. They develop self-awareness. And as they get a little bit older, they start saying things like mine and me, and basically, that's when the ego is beginning to form, according to Jung, right? Remember, the ego is that part of them that is conscious and selects what we pay attention to, what we deal with, how we behave ourselves, that kind of stuff. So when they learn to distinguish between themselves and others, and they use the words I, me, mine, that means the ego is beginning to form. That is that part of them that selects and attends to things. They are, that is beginning to develop. Let's keep going. More about childhood to adulthood. The psyche assumes a definite form and content during puberty. According to Jung, remember, the psyche is his term for personality. Your personality really emerges, during puberty. That is, he called that your psychic birth. So that is basically, if you remember puberty, when, during adolescence, basically, there comes that time when all of a sudden you become very concerned about what you look like and who you hang out with and what you're going to wear. And according to Jung, this is when your personality is really beginning to emerge. Because before that, you were kind of just going along with what parents told you, with how they wanted you to dress, who they wanted you to play with, all that stuff. And during this time, you begin to really take notice, and you basically become very concerned about who you are and who you hang out with. And you care a lot about those things. They may seem very shallow at first. You care a lot about looks and clothes and music and things like that. But it is your psychic birth, according to Jung. It's when you're truly becoming concerned about who you are, and your personality is really going to take shape from here on out. Before that, it was really more about developing self-awareness, right? Distinguishing yourself from others. But now who you really are will begin to really take shape. It starts at puberty, according to Jung. We become concerned with, education, as well, about going to school, taking classes, you're in school, long before, of course, you start puberty, but, you become concerned about those things. Even career, what you're going to do with yourself, what you're good at, what are you going to do when you grow up? Those are things that adolescents think about a lot. Marriage, who you're going to hook up with, who you're going to marry, right? Who you're going to date. All those things become concern. Even concerned with starting a family for some people, right? So you become concerned with things that are physical and material, really, okay? And according to Jung, we are primarily focused outward. We are concerned about who we are, right? Our personality, and that might seem that it's focusing inward. But the way we try to determine who we are at the beginning is really by looking outward, okay? We're concerned about who we hang out with, who our friends are, who we, develop a romantic relationship with, what kind of classes you take, and what you want to do with your career, things like that. So we're concerned with the outside things, believe it or not, during adolescence. We're actually very shallow and self-centered during adolescence. And according to Jung, he said we are primarily extroverted. We're concerned about all the things outside. Who you are, your personality, isn't really about what you are like on the inside. It's not about looking in, it's about looking out. And that's how your personality first begins to take shape, by looking at, see what's around you, and, and who's around you, and how you're going to dress, who you're going to hang out with, all those things. So it's primarily shallow. I'm not saying that extroverted people are shallow, but you're primarily focused outward. Okay. That's how your personality begins to develop. And at the beginning, we're kind of copy our personality from what we see around us. If you look back at, the pictures of yourself when you were, an adolescent, some of you maybe still are adolescents, but when you were your, early teens, for instance, or mid-teens, you'll probably notice that you wanted to be like certain people. You wanted to look like certain people that you saw on TV, or musicians, or whoever it is that you identify with. Okay, so we're primarily focused outward. We are extroverted during this time, according to Jung. Yeah, and I just to tell you a little bit more, I remember during this time, during adolescence, we're easily swayed by what's happening around us. And I remember at the time when I was growing up, when I was like in junior high and in high school, Arnold Schwarzenegger was a huge movie star. He still kind of is, but back then he was really starting to make it big with his Terminator movies. He was this huge movie star. He was the biggest movie star on the planet. And of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, was really, massive, very muscular. He's buff, so to speak, and guess what? During my time, when I was in high school and junior high and stuff, a lot of guys, actually, a lot of males wanted to be like him. We started working out. We wanted to be muscular. We wanted to be buff, so to speak. And of course, most of us couldn't be that way. I was a scrawny kid, weighed about 125 pounds, but I would work out, and I wanted to be like that. And I remember we'd wear those shirts called tank tops and stuff like that, showing our arms and our muscles. And we didn't really have that much muscle, most of us, but we wanted to be like that. We usually want to be like the people we see around us, the people who are cool or well-known or popular. And we're just copying others. We're being really extroverted. We're focusing outward during this time. As we get older, we enter middle age, things really change. And Jung, by the way, considered middle age to be like 35 to 40 years of age. Keep in mind that we're talking about a theory that was proposed, basically, not 100 years ago, but uh, almost, okay? It's been a long time, basically, since you, I don't remember the exact dates, but it's probably been like 70, 80 years or so that how old this theory is. But, uh, so this is kind of outdated. Like, for instance, like just to backtrack a little bit, like during our adolescence, right? Focus on marriage, starting a family, that's outdated. People don't get married and start a family that early anymore. Most people are looking to put that off. But there are people who do start a family that early. There are people who do get married that early. But often that happens because people are experimenting with sex and they get pregnant and they start a family before they're ready. But most people are looking to put that off. There's no way that they want to start a family, when they're, 16, 17, 18 years old, even 20 years old. So this is a bit outdated. We wait a lot longer now to start a family. And then middle age, 35, 40, not really considered middle age anymore. Middle age now is more like 45, 50 or beyond. I consider myself to be middle age. I'm older than that. I'm past 40, okay? So I'm not even middle age according to Jung, but you can still think of it as middle age as basically when people are older. We think of that now more as 40s, 50s. That's middle age, okay? During middle age, things change according to Jung. During middle age, the goals of young adulthood have been accomplished. Hopefully you've gotten a good education, right? You have a career, you've gotten married, you've started a family by this time, okay? So you've accomplished a lot of things. Your children may actually be close to being grown up already, or maybe they are grown up, depending on when you started having a family. During Jung's time, by the time you were 40, your kids were grown up. Even by your mid 30s, they might already be grown up. So we have to keep that in mind, okay? But during middle age, let's think of it like the 40s, like mid 40s to like mid 50s. The goals of young adults have mostly been accomplished. Yes, you've got an education, you've got your career going, marriage is, you've got your marriage, right? Family, that's been established, and your kids are probably grown up and maybe even out of the house. And what happens, according to Jung, is that you develop a crisis. You go through a crisis where you feel empty inside. You feel worthless. There's not much excitement in your life anymore. You don't know what to do with yourself. Life has lost its meaning. At first, it was about career and education and getting married, starting a family, but that's kind of done now. And yeah, you could still be working, your marriage could still be going, but you've accomplished a lot of things, and you sit there wondering that, is this all there is to life? I feel like there's something missing. Is this all there is? What do I do with myself now? So because we have been so successful at meeting our goals, energy has nowhere to go. So we can have this so-called midlife crisis where we start reevaluating things and start thinking about things again and about, what we want to do with ourselves, because it seems like we've already accomplished the things we wanted to accomplish. And the kids may even be grown up and like, now what do I do with myself? I'm not living for my kids anymore. Yeah, I still have a career. I'm still working, but I don't want that to be my whole life. So there's this crisis. And I do want to point out that this crisis, according to modern research, doesn't happen to everybody. Okay, that most people deal with middle age just fine, and they don't have this crisis, this crippling crisis, right, where they're wondering and they feel empty and worthless, and they feel like they have to make drastic changes in their life. That mostly doesn't happen. But Jung reasoned that, yes, this is a time of crisis. We feel worthless and empty. Now what do we do with ourselves? Okay. So what happens, more about middle age, is that during middle age, we must begin to undergo a transformation. We have to redirect our unconscious wishes that have been neglected. See, because we have, before middle age, we were working on family and career and raising kids and dealing with all those things, right? We have neglected ourselves. According to Jung, we have been primarily focused outward. Remember, extrovert, right? Raising a family, going to work, even hanging out with friends and all that stuff. And what we have been doing is we have been doing what other people really expect from us and what other people want us to do. And now that we've gone to middle age and those things are accomplished, now we have to start thinking differently and start thinking about, okay, I've been living for other people. Now it's time to start living for myself. What is it about myself that I've been neglected? What have I been kind of, been keeping in my unconscious, things that I've wanted to do, but I didn't because I was just basically living according to other people's rules and standards. I've been raising a family, going to work, doing the things I have to do, Now what do I do with myself? So you have to redirect those unconscious wishes, those things that you've been keeping hidden inside. Now you need to look at that stuff that's hidden in the unconscious, and that stuff now needs to emerge. So we begin the process of self-realization by becoming more introverted, spiritual, philosophical, intuitive. So now it's time to look within and think about things about yourself that you've been neglecting. Things that maybe would complete you and make you happy. Now you have maybe the time and money and even the wisdom to seek those things. So you become more spiritual, philosophical, intuitive. It's time to look within. For some people, yes, it is spiritual. It's about connecting with God and becoming more spiritual. For some people, it's more philosophical and finding more meaning in their lives, by meditating or maybe even traveling or just thinking about things. But either way, you become more intuitive, right? It's more about how you feel, about your gut feeling about, okay, so what does my gut tell me that I should be seeking now, what I should be? You need to look within, in other words, to find yourself, because you've been neglecting yourself by just meeting society's demands, right? Right up until middle age is the time when you start thinking about things again. You start reevaluating things and start asking yourself, am I really happy? Right? What do I do with myself now? But keep in mind, not everybody is successful. Jung is assuming that things have gone well and that you are successful by this time and comfortable. And the truth is that nowadays, a lot of people are not. And even back during Jung's time. So it's a biased point of view. Jung was, white male, relatively successful himself. I believe he was Jewish. A lot of these personality theorists, by the way, that we're going to talk about are Jewish. And it's a biased perspective there, but it's not the same reality for everybody. But he's assuming by this time that you've accomplished things, you're successful at raising a family, and now it's time to start thinking about yourself. It's time to look within. And then if you are successful, you'll reach the stage of individuation. When you fulfill your capacity, right, and you develop the self, okay, you become who you were meant to be, okay? You self-actualize, so to speak. The tendency to achieve your full capacity, to individuate, right, basically, that tendency is innate. It's inborn. That means that it's there, right? We didn't learn it. It was always there, but it can be hindered by our environment. Poverty, wealth, depending on the environment you have, it can hinder that tendency. By the way, poverty, of course, will be a hindrance to your full development. Struggling to pay bills, to feed your family, not having your basic needs met, or just struggling, working day and night, having several jobs just to get by, will, of course, hinder your personality development. According to Jung, you can't really become who you're meant to be if you're being held down by society, if you're too poor to really be able to stop and think and basically work on who you really are and developing your full self. Because if you are basically a slave to your job and to your family and to society, you're not really working on yourself. You're not really developing yourself when you're really meant to be. You're really just, reacting, so to speak. If you are wealthy, it's easier. If you're wealthy, then you don't really have to work anymore. If you've acquired wealth, maybe you can retire early, or maybe you were born wealthy and you don't even have to work. And you can just spend time, let's say, wondering about who you are. You can travel and learn about new things and places, and it can help your personality development. Being actually also very wealthy can also be a hindrance, by the way, because some people don't know how to deal with that. Let's say if you are very wealthy and you decide, yeah, you know what, I don't need to go to school. I don't need to work toward a career, so I'm going to drop out of school, right? Out of high school. I'm not going to go to college, and, I'm not really going to strive for anything. You're just going to enjoy yourself, right? Watch TV, smoke weed, or do drugs or whatever it is. And that way it can be a hindrance, and you don't really develop your personality either, because you're not being challenged. You're not really seeking knowledge. You're not really seeking things, because you're just sitting there like a satisfied lump. So wealth, it can help, right? But it can also be a hindrance. And if you live in an environment where the type of government also matters. Democracy is helpful, right? If we live in a place where we have democracy, where we have freedom of speech, of religion, we're free to be ourselves, right? That will help with personality development. But if you live in a place where you are, basically you have a dictatorship, or you have a type of government that's very oppressive, where you're not allowed to think and say what you want, you're not allowed to do what you want, to dress however you want, or listen to whatever music you want, that will hinder your personality development. It's like you're imprisoned, so to speak, and you can't really be who you are. And by the way, there's governments, nations where religion isn't even allowed. So if you are a spiritual person, you can't really seek that. And there are places where they have one religion. They say, you live in this country, this is the religion. Everyone needs to follow this religion. But maybe you found something different and you think something else works better for you. You don't have that freedom. You can actually be executed just for worshiping another god. You can be executed for basically coming out and saying that you're gay or lesbian. There are places in the world like that. That will hinder your personality development. So yes, you need freedom, you need democracy, right? Some wealth is useful, but it can also be a hindrance, right? Poverty is not useful. Having very mean, demanding parents who are kind of like that dictator who just rule over you and don't let you become who you are, that can be a hindrance. So the environment matters a lot. But when you achieve individuation, what happens is you abandon the behaviors that guided the first half of your life. No longer are you living for other people or doing things just because other people want them to do. Now you need to bring that unconscious awareness to consciousness. You need to look at what you've been neglected. Those wishes, those fantasies, those desires, those creative tendencies that you've had to kind of neglect or put aside because you just wanted to raise a family and you had to get a real job, because it's really hard to make a living out of being an artist or a musician. So maybe you just had to take a real job, right? And now it's time for you to let those creative tendencies out. So you need to look within and become who you're really meant to be. And when you achieve your full potential, your capacity, that's when you achieve individuation. Let's keep going. More about individuation. So things that happen during individuation, right? You dethrone your persona. In other words, you throw away that mask you've been wearing all your life, showing people that you're a certain kind of person, right? That is not who you are. You need to get rid of that mask and accept your true self, right? And that includes accepting your true self. It includes the shadow. It includes being selfish, creative, spontaneous. It includes that kind of dark kind of nature, that animalistic side of you, right? That's a part of you. And now that you're older and you've been more successful, you can let that shadow out a little bit more. And you can be a little bit more wild, a little bit more creative, right? Because you've achieved a lot of things in your life that you wanted to achieve. So it's safer for you to do those things now, to be a little bit more selfish. Your kids are grown up, let's say. To be creative and seek something else other than just, that's more of your true passion rather than just doing your job. To be more spontaneous and just take off on a trip, right? Without much planning. You can do that when you are more comfortable, when you're older, wiser, when you've achieved a lot of the goals of the first half of your life. So it's time to get rid of that mask. You don't have to be, that kind of, how should I say, the very responsible parent. Your kids are grown up. You don't have to be much of a parent anymore, right? You don't have to be that uptight person who works in the office all the time. You can say, you know what, outside of work, I'm going to be something different. That's not who I am. Even me as a teacher here, as a professor, I'm showing you a certain side of myself, my persona, my mask. Okay. But if I am to be who I really want to be, then I have to be a little bit more wild, a little bit more free. And that is a part of me. And I do let that out a little bit, but while I'm working, I'm very busy during the semester. I don't have much of a chance to really let out the shadow so much, or to be my true self so much. My job actually is a part of my true self, because this is sort of what I believe I'm meant to do. This is my job, and there's a reason why I have this kind of job. My job is part of my identity. But I will tell you that for most people, their jobs is just a way to make a paycheck. About 60% of Americans don't even like their jobs. Their job does not reflect who they are, and it does not complete them. Okay, so, in other words, they're just wearing a mask, their persona. So it's time to get rid of that and time to start living a little bit for yourself. Be a little bit more selfish. Okay. Yes, I do wear a mask too. I do have a persona, there are other aspects of me that you don't see. But I'm not completely fake. It's not that different from who I really am. I really do love philosophy. I really do love psychology, thinking about these things, but I also have another side of me. I like the outdoors. I like to be out there. I like to, to travel, even though I don't do it very much. I've been neglecting that part of me, right? I don't have much of a creative side, but, I love animals and I love the outdoors, and, that's not what I show, in class, because in class, I'm just supposed to be this professor, right? Knowledgeable and respectable and responsible and reliable and all that stuff, and a good teacher, right? But I am more than that. So time to get rid of that mask, dethrone the persona, accept both the animus and anima forces. So in other words, we all have both masculine and feminine aspects of ourselves. We need to accept both. According to Jung, we are essentially all bisexual, that we have both feminine and masculine tendencies. And we need, if we're going to be ourselves, if we're going to be who we really are, achieve individuation, we have to accept both of those. No longer do you have to be masculine all the time. Come on, you're married, raised a family and stuff like that. You can be sensitive once in a while. You can be different. Okay, you don't always have to show that masculine side. Or even if let's say you just, you're a woman and, you've been showing that feminine side, that nurturing side, right? You're raising a family, just, or doing your job, whatever it is. If you have a job outside of, raising a family, hey, it's time for you now to be a little bit more aggressive, more assertive, and not just follow the norms or the rules of, society's conventions, so to speak. It's time to be more yourself. You are both masculine and feminine. You should show both. Show your sensitive side, right, if you've been neglecting it, or show your more assertive, dominant side, right, if you've been neglecting that. But it's time for you to accept both aspects of yourself. If you are successful, and according to Jung, rarely do people achieve individuation, really become who they're really meant to be. Most of us will fall short of that. But if we are successful, we will achieve wholeness. We will feel whole, complete, and happy, like there's nothing missing. We'll achieve unity. Transcendence. Transcendence means that we live in a higher spiritual reality. It's not so much about, acquiring possessions and wealth and getting a bigger house and a nicer house, a nicer car, right? Nicer clothes. Sure, we would like those things, but when we achieve individuation, we realize that those things don't even matter. We live in a higher spiritual reality. Okay, it doesn't have to be related to church or God, but we live in a different reality. Okay, well, we are not being driven. We are not just responding to those around us, to the forces around us. We live for who we truly are. It's, it's a different reality. And when you do, step back from, the need, that what you've been experiencing so long, and you're able to find that transcendence, you think differently. You realize what's important and what's not important. And a lot of the things in our lives that we regard as important actually are not important. What really matters, well, you'll find that. But what really matters is are really our family, the people we care about, the people we love, people we want to spend time with, our connections. Those things really matter, but other things as well, but think of it this way. If you were dying, what do you think you would miss the most? What do you think you would be thinking about? Would you be thinking about your possessions, really? That house, that car? No, you wouldn't be thinking about those things. You would be thinking about your loved ones and wishing you had more time with them. And to transcend the everyday means that you not only realize these things, but that you make different choices. You know, you value different things. You live in a higher spiritual reality. Money is not important as long as you have enough to get by, right? Possessions are not as important as you think they are. But it's a different thing for different people. But you transcend the everyday. You no longer live like an animal, or no longer live like a robot, or just function the way other people want you to function. You are yourself, and you live in a higher spirituality. And I'll tell you this, it's not about the physical things. It's about the spiritual things. It's about the philosophical things. It's about the things that you can't really touch. That is what transcendence is about. You live in a different reality. It's almost like you're in a trance to some extent, and you don't see things the way other people see them. All right, that is Jung's theory. Now we're going to talk about things related to Jung's theory. We're going to talk about assessment. What did Jung do to assess the people he treated? He was a therapist, just like Freud, a psychoanalyst to some extent. He, you know, analytic psychology is his approach. So one thing he used was the word association test. That page number is no longer accurate. Reflects the, you know, another book that I used to use, and so that's not accurate. So with the word association test, you respond to a word with whatever comes to mind. It's basically free association. Freud used, you know, a similar technique, but with Freud would ask something like, Freud would say something like, "Tell me about your mother," or "Tell me about your father," and then whatever comes to mind, you speak of it. That's free association. With word association, they give you a certain word. They say a certain word, and then you speak about whatever comes to mind. They also use physiological measures to elicit emotions and complexes. So they would check, you know, look at things like, you know, blood pressure and, you know, other things to see what's, you know, what's really happening, how you're responding emotionally, or uncover those complexes, right? The word association test can also uncover complexes, a complex, right? If you hear certain words and what keeps coming to mind is something like disease and illness, you might have a complex, right? Where you might be really, you know, very pessimistic or afraid of death. You might have some kind of complex. So that's the word association test. There's also symptom analysis, a technique where patients' associations to symptoms are elicited and interpreted. So remember, he was treating people who had, you know, psychological problems. So they would basically try to determine what is associated with those symptoms, what comes to mind, you know, those kind of things. Okay. Dream analysis we've talked about before, in which they interpret your dreams, right? A series of dreams are used to probe the unconscious. Dreams are a way to show us what's really hidden away in our unconscious. Same thing that Freud believed there when it comes to dreams. Dreams reveal themes and issues, and they help us anticipate future behavior. Unlike Freud, dreams are not just about what's in your unconscious and what happened long ago, but dreams can also tell us about the future. Okay, about you know, what we want to do and where we want to get to. So dreams reveal what's hidden away. They reveal past issues, but they can also reveal things about the future, or things that we want to seek, or things we want to anticipate. There's also the Myers-Briggs type indicator, which some of you have probably heard of. It's a test to assess these psychological types. Remember extroverted sensing, right? Extroverted thinking or introverted thinking. Remember those psychological types? Again, the page number is wrong, right? There is this test, the Myers-Briggs type indicator, the MBTI. It was not developed by Jung. It was developed decades after Jung to determine the type of person that you are, your personality type. And it can also be used not just to determine your personality, but to help you determine, you know, what kind of career you should be looking at. So it's used by counselors often to help students, you know, think a little bit more, or help them determine a little bit more who they are and what kind of choices they should be making as far as what kind of classes to take, what kind of careers to look into. But it's something that's useful. You can copy that link, paste it on the address bar. It'll take you somewhere where you can click, 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 submit, and it'll tell you your personality types. It's not that you have one, but some are stronger than others. And you'll see what your personality type is like. I haven't done it in a while. I don't remember mine specifically, but I can tell you, I know because of who I am, and I'm pretty sure the test confirmed this, although I haven't looked at it in a while. that I am mostly the introverted thinking type. I'm in the introverted thinking type. I mean, my first love was philosophy, as far as, a field of study, philosophy, and that led me to psychology. And and I am that type. I like science and theory. I've been trained to do research. That is who I am. More about Jung's theory, at least the research on Jung's theory. A lot of similarities here with Freud when it comes to what research says about Jung's theory. Jung, again, wasn't really a scientist. So he used case studies. He treated people one-on-one, and he took, notes and stuff like that. He studied people and he tried to treat them. So he used case studies of single individuals. So you can't really verify what he did, if he really did that, or if it really worked. You can't really replicate it. You can't really quantify what he did. It's not like he was a researcher and he ran experiments and he has numbers or anything like that. No verbatim records. It's not like he kept very careful records that are word for word. People wrote things down. They took notes. And that's usually in shorthand, and it wasn't word for word. It's not like somebody recorded everything that he said and his patients said, okay? He didn't really use a representative sample. He treated people who had some kind of psychological disturbance. So his theory is not based on studying healthy people. You can't really generalize that too well because, not everybody is basically suffering from some psychological problem. Actually, we all suffer from time to time, I would say that. But the criticism is here that the sample of people that he used, where he got all his ideas, are basically people who had psychological problems, people who were undergoing treatment. And most of us probably we have problems, but not to the extent where we require treatment. Some of us may, okay? Some of us are in denial. We all have problems, okay? We all have issues. And I think we could all benefit from, some of these therapeutic techniques that were developed. But you can't really generalize from that too well. At least it's been criticized for that. The analysis of his data was subjective. He didn't really have data, okay? He just interpreted things in the way he thought were correct. Can't really rely on that. Unreliable, right? He wasn't a scientist. He didn't take careful measurements of anything, okay? Conclusions may have been biased to fit his theory. Yes, he had his theory he proposed. And when you have a theoretical framework, you tend to interpret things in light of that. So it is biased, okay? These early people were not scientists. And we're going to talk about a lot of theories that are like that. Eventually, we will get to theories that are very scientific, that are based on research and were developed by people who are real scientists. Experimental tests of Jung's concepts, like research on introverts is actually consistent with Jung's theories, okay? Being an introvert versus being an extrovert. Extroverts are more interested in jobs with social interaction, where you talk to people and you interact with people. Extroverts are interested in that. So some examples would be sales, public relations. There are other things, but introverts are different, and they're more interested in jobs with little social interaction. They prefer to focus within. So more technical jobs where they keep to themselves and they're thinking about things, or things that are more scientific, being a researcher or scientist, right? That's what I am. We tend to be introverts more than people who are, let's say, in business or in sales or in marketing or something like that. So extroverts and introverts are different, and they prefer different kinds of jobs. Other experimental tests of Jung's concepts. Yes, remember the sensing type, the thinking type, and all that stuff. People who are high in intuiting prefer more creative jobs. They go with their gut feeling, their hunch. They like jobs where they can be creative and they can think outside the box, so to speak, where they can try different things. Being an artist, a musician, things like that. Those are the people who are high in intuition. They like things like that. People who are high in sensing prefer conventional jobs. Remember that sensing has to do with the 5 senses, right? You want to touch things, okay? You want to smell things. You want to see things, right? People who are high in sensing want a job where they use their hands, where they see things and touch things. Those are conventional jobs. Those are mostly the kind of jobs we have, where you're physically doing something. Introverts, when it comes to having discussion in class, right? Introverts are the ones who share things more frequently, who contribute more discussion. They make very thoughtful contributions to class discussion. Those that are high in intuiting, who go with their gut feeling, their hunch, they're the ones who make the best contributions according to research. the ones who say the most meaningful things in class when it comes to discussion. The sensing types make the worst contributions. The sensing types are more about people who want hands-on things. You know, they want to be a welder, or they want to, you know, do something with their hands. And that's really, you know, not so much what psychology is about. You don't really have to put your hands on people. It's more about the mind and thinking and feeling and things like that. It's not really, you're not really doing things with your hands. It's more about things you do with your mind. Okay, it's more about things that are within. Other studies, individuation research, research on, you know, individuation, about achieving your full potential, becoming complete. There was a study done with corporate executives that were 37 to 55 years of age that showed that corporate executives display behaviors consistent with individuation. You know, that they're more introverted, you know, that, you know, they look within more for direction and energy, rather than just looking out at people or just trying to talk to people. They look within, right? They value their own judgment as well. They question the old values, so they look for new ways of doing things. That means they have to look within and explore ideas, right? Reveal newer part about themselves, right? You know, to reveal parts about themselves that, you know, they've been neglecting. If you're a corporate executive, you're usually very busy, but at the same time, you make a lot of money and you have a lot of freedoms, a lot of things that you can do when you work for the corporation. You have a lot of sway, so to speak. Whereas if you're a rank and file worker, you're very limited in what you can do, and you know, and the kind of power that you have, the kind of influence that you have. Corporate executives can be more playful, more spontaneous, right? Yeah, because they have that power, they have that authority, and sometimes, of course, they can get in trouble for that. You know, if they try to, you know, let's say, take advantage of someone, some of their workers. There are things like sexual harassment and things like that, you know, but yeah, they, you know, they can have affairs and seek things, you know, like that. Basically, that's expressing the, you know, the shadow, where they're just maybe being spontaneous, decide to hit on somebody, or, you know, do something like that. And of course that, you know, is inappropriate. But the point is that, you know, they show some things that are consistent with individuation. And by that, I don't mean sexual harassment, but I mean that they look within, a bit more creative, let out the shadow a little bit more and things like that. They have the power, you know, they still have the energy, you know, if they're not too old. And they show some characteristics of individuation. Yeah, I mean, biased research here. Yeah, easy to do that when you're a, you know, a rich, you know, powerful individual. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of do a lot of things you want to do. Other research, more about individuation research. Research shows that the midlife transition is more difficult for women, actually, who pursue careers than women who are just homemakers. You get to that point when you have that midlife crisis, right? Research shows that it's more difficult for women who actually have to both work and raise children and raise a family. Remember, traditionally, women have been thought of as the ones who take care of the kids and do the cooking and the cleaning. And even though we believe in equality and we believe things should be equal and that they must be equal, for the most part, women still the vast majority of that. Guys said they're going to help, they believe in that, and then when it comes right down to it, they don't really do that much, most of them. So women who have those dual roles, which a lot of women do nowadays, right? Homemakers and have a career, their midlife transition is tougher, you know? When they get to that middle age part of their lives, they really question things. It's like, am I really happy? Do I really enjoy what I'm doing? Am I doing the right things, right? It can be more difficult for them than if you're a male and yeah, you help out with the stuff at home, but you mostly devote yourself to your career, you know? And the study also showed that there's 3 levels of individuation when it comes to women. There are women who are conflicted, who basically have very poor relations, anxiety, and hostility. The women who don't deal with those dual roles very well. You know, they have a lot of problems with their kids, with their husband, with their boss, right? Like anxious, hostile, angry. There are women like that. And I know this might sound mean, but I believe that's my wife. You know, she works really hard, but it's also hard to raise a family. And we have a child that's on the autism spectrum, and we have a daughter who is actually very smart and probably gifted, who's like years ahead of the average as far as what she's able to do and understand. So we have children at the opposite ends, and especially the one that's on the autism spectrum. He is very, very difficult. And yes, she takes it upon herself to do most of the work. I mean, she works really hard. She teaches high school, teaches AP, and she's just started teaching AP, and now she's having to do it over Zoom, and she's really stressed about that. But also our son is very difficult, you know. But it's not just, you know, when she started teaching on Zoom or started teaching AP, it's always kind of been that way. We've always had problems. She's always been, you know, obsessive compulsive and angry and very easily stressed out and depressed. And it's tough to be a modern day woman where you have a job and you also have family, and she takes it upon herself to basically do too much. I help, but often she just gets mad at me because she expects me to do something, but didn't tell me. And in reality, she didn't really expect me to do that. She just got mad at me that basically she's doing it and I'm not. So that's more the conflicted type. There are those who are more traditional, that are just marriage focused, but not career focused, you know, more that traditional kind of woman, right? They lack psychological maturity. They are not, you know, their personality is often not fully developed because they haven't really, you know, sought things outside of the home, haven't been career focused. So they lack self-understanding. You know, they've just devoted themselves to being a wife and raising children. There's more to life than that. Now, those are probably the most important things, but there's more to it than that. Those who go to college and have a career have greater opportunity to learn about who they are and other things that make them happy. And then you have the truly individuated women, the women who are able to balance, you know, the career and the life at home. The individual women have high autonomy. They feel like they can basically do what they want to do, govern themselves. You know, they're creative and flexible. They're close to others. They're empathetic, right? You know, they show kindness for other people. They understand what other people are going through. Intellectual, right? Sophisticated. Those are the people who are individuated. And if this sounds biased to you, it's because it is. Who are the individuated people? During Jung's time, I mean, for the most part, those were the people who were wealthy and can seek those intellectual interests and those creative aspects of themselves. The reality is that most people don't achieve that because we are slaves, most of us, to society. I don't really regard myself of that. My job gives me plenty of time off, plenty of freedom and creativity. I'm not really creative, but, you know, but for the most part, the people who achieve individuation are the people who have it better financially, economically, you know, when it comes to class and things like that. When I think of an individuated woman like Jung is talking about, I picture that, you know, kind of upper class, sophisticated woman with the, you know, with the cocktail dress, and, you know, that's basically, she knows she has authority and power, and she knows she's sophisticated and smart, and she lives life the way she wants to, you know, but very few people achieve that. That is it, you guys. So we will stop there.